Hi everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. Today I'm showing you a card I made using supplies in the April 2021 card kit, including this stamp set, which is called Friendly Flowers. I'm going to be using it for the bulk of the design on my card today. I have a piece of craft cardstock. It's a Nita Desert Storm cardstock, cut to 3 3/4 wide by 5.5 tall. And then I'm using this cream colored card base. It's scored and folded. It comes in the card kit. And I'm going to jump right into the stamping. I'm taking the large floral image from the stamp set, and I'm going to be stamping that in Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. I'm planning to do some Copic coloring on top of this craft surface, and so I needed to use a Copic friendly ink, and Intense Black ink from Simon is Copic friendly. Once it's dry, it won't smear or bleed when you use your alcohol markers on top. So I stamped that image twice for a really crisp impression, and then I rotated that cardstock and I stamped again. Just that same image, I moved it around so that it would fill the other half of my cardstock. And then I used the 2 individual flower stamps in the stamp set to fill in some gaps over on the side. And that filled this entire area without too many gaps around the individual stamp shapes. So now I'm going to stamp, and I apologize that you zoomed in a little bit. I just stamped the greeting, and that's so that I can take a black Copic marker and go over that area all in black. My plan for the finished card is to have kind of like very organic black brush strokes behind the greeting. So I thought I would go ahead and just map that out now before I start coloring so that I have an idea of where the greeting will be. And also this makes it so I don't have to color those areas. My colors are inspired by one of the pieces of pattern paper in the kit, some nice teals, greens, and pinks. So I'm going to just jump right in and start coloring with my Copic markers. I did very simple coloring, basically just 2 colors for each kind of item. So for these pink flowers, I used a lighter pink followed by a darker pink, just to add a little bit of shadow in some of those areas, kind of the interior of the flower. I then used the lighter pink to blend out that shadow area. Now I think if I was to do this card again, and if I wanted a little bit more dimension on these flowers, I would come in with an even darker pink, or maybe even a brown, just for those deep dark shades in the deep recesses of the flower. I think it would look really, really great having just a little bit more contrast. The other flowers I decided to color in a teal combination. So I have a very pale aqua, which looks a little bit different on top of this craft cardstock. And then I have a darker blue for the shading, and I went back and blended out that shading with the original light blue shade. The leaves were done even more simply with, again, just 2 shades, a light green and a slightly darker green. And the difference in shades on this particular combination of colors didn't show very much after everything was dry, but it was nice to have a little bit of a darker tone in there. So after I colored in all of the green, I was trying to decide what color I wanted for the little flowers that are all around, and I decided to go for a bright yellow, which is toned down quite a bit by the color of the cardstock I'm coloring on top of. You'll see that even though I have a lemon yellow, it's a very, very bright yellow color, it does look more muted and pale, almost like an ochre shade, once it's colored on top of this dark surface. For these berries, I used some slightly more red-violet shades for more of a kind of a dark cranberry shade once it's all colored in. And I made sure to do the lighter color first and then come in with that darker shade. Now you'll notice there's a lot of little areas where I went outside the lines on all of these flowers and leaves and berries. But once you have everything colored in, you hardly even notice those little mistakes. It's very forgiving. I used a W1 warm gray just to add a little bit of shadow around the flowers. I'm now using the ultra fine cream embossing powder that comes in the card kit, And I'm going to test out this black area before I start stamping, just to make sure it's completely dry. It looks like it's pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and stamp. I'm first going to prep it with an anti-static powder tool, just because this is a great practice whenever you're going to be embossing, and it also just makes sure everything's going to come out perfectly in the end. So I have my stamp positioned, and I'm going to stamp in Versamark ink this time. Versamark is great for embossing powders, so it's going to stay nice and sticky until I have that embossing powder applied. Press that down, and then I sprinkled on some of that ultra-fine cream embossing powder. And that coffee filter down below catches it, and I can funnel that back in the jar when I'm finished. I hit that with my heat tool until it was smooth and melted. And then I moved on to a little bit of kind of correction around the grading. I needed a little bit more black all around, so I'm just using that 100 black shade once again to add a little more black around those areas, just to make sure everything stands out nicely. So I wanted to use that diagonal stripe border stamp in the stamp set. So I decided to put that on either side of this panel that I've colored. And that's why I cut the panel a little bit more narrow. If you remember, I mentioned that I cut it to 3 3/4 wide. So it's just a little bit, actually I think it might be 3 1/2 wide. I'm not entirely sure, but I wanted just some space on either side of that panel so that I could stamp this diagonal border stamp. So I've stamped both of those in that same intense black ink, just so all of our black inks match. I put some foam adhesive on the back of my colored panel, and then I placed it directly onto my card front. And I made sure to walk my fingertips over all of that to get a really good adhesion to that card front. For a little bit of detail, I took a white gel pen. This is a number 10 Jelly Roll pen, and I added little dots to the centers of the flowers. And this is going to give it just a little bit of brightness in those areas. And that's my card for today. If you would like to get the April 2021 card kit, you can get it over at simonsystamp.com. Thanks so much for watching today, and I will see you guys in another video very soon.